Listen-only mode.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Cheryl Welbeck. I'm the project manager for Directors of Health Promotion and Education. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar presented as part of the National Implementation and Dissemination for Chronic Disease Prevention Initiative. Today's webinar is on communicating your success, which will focus on success story development. Today's session will provide you an opportunity to learn and identify ways to communicate your success on this particular project. Today's presenter is Melissa Byers. She has 8 years of experience helping communities tell their stories of success. Currently, she trains CDC's Division of Community Health awardees on how to write impactful stories for different audiences. Before we begin today's webinar, you'll notice a control panel to your right. All attendees are now on mute to avoid any background noise. Today's webinar will be recorded, and we will provide a copy of the recorded webinar archive for your convenience, or for anyone who missed today's webinar and would like to get a copy of today's content. We'll also have a PDF version of the presentation for today. In the control panel, you'll notice a couple of sections. We'd like to ask you to type any technical questions you might have, like technical issues as far as audio or visual into the question box. And if you have questions for the speaker, we'd also like to ask you to put those questions in the question box as well. There is a chat feature located at the very bottom of the control panel, and feel free to use that at any time during the presentation. You can direct messages to the audience for all to see, or you can send them directly to me or to the presenter. We do have a lot of material to cover. So we'd like to ask you to hold your questions until the end. You can put them in the box, but we'll ask Melissa to address those as we near the end of today's presentation. We will have a couple of poll questions during the presentation, and I'll give some additional instruction on how to participate during the presentation as we approach those. So, Melissa, welcome to today's webinar, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Cheryl. Hi, everyone. We do have, of course, our typical CDC disclaimer slide. And we're going to talk a little bit about today's crafting strong success stories. And more specifically, our webinar today will cover defining what a success story is. It will define the different types of success stories that you might be writing. We'll also be identifying the main components or building blocks of a strong success story and how data relates to each of those elements. Finally, we'll discuss how you can use the Division of Community Health Success Stories application to craft those strong success stories. Like Cheryl said, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation, and of course we'll conclude by sharing some additional resources and some handouts available. But first, we'd like to start off with one of the polling questions that Cheryl mentioned. Have you ever created any kind of success story? Maybe it was pages long or perhaps only a few sentences. It could have been maybe shared via radio or print or even video. This question really asks, have you ever had to determine the success of an initiative or activity and share that information with others? So please use the polling function to answer A for yes, B for no, or C if you're not quite sure. We'll give everybody a moment to vote. And it looks like that most of you guys have actually created some type of success or had to share some type of success before. And the truth is that, yes, 71% of folks answered yes. And the truth is that many of you are actually sharing multiple kinds or creating multiple kinds of success stories. And for those of you who are thinking that maybe answering C or not sure, you may find you're reporting successes to many stakeholders in your community and just don't call them success stories, or they're not structured like a success story. In the next few slides, we'll talk about the important factors in your success story and how you can share them. This can help you in the development of the success stories you may need to submit to your funding organizations or to other stakeholders in your community. But first, we'll start off with a definition. A success story can describe any activity you do to complete the work. So The story describes the change. What was life like before? What changed? What is it like now? And how will the change be continued? They are a valuable tool to reach stakeholders. And for the purposes of this presentation, we're defining stakeholders as those who can help or hinder your activities at the local, county, state, or national level. And although we'll talk about the techniques you can use to craft a strong success story, it's key to remember that success stories are designed to be concise and engaging, and most importantly, show measurable positive change. Success stories really add value to the work, not just from a monetary standpoint, but from an emotional standpoint as well. They report information in a way that everyone in the community can understand, not just those that work in public health. They add credibility to the work. Credibility comes from the emotional engagement to the people who benefit from the changes, and credibility also comes from the science illustrated in the data included in the story. So success stories can increase visibility of your work. This includes external and internal promotion. Stories share the impact in a way everyone can understand, and internally, they can foster discussion within your organization. But why do success stories work so well? Why not just share the reports you create or the numbers of lives touched? So often when you write reports or reporting statistics, you're targeting audiences in your field or profession with a great depth of knowledge about the specific initiatives that you work with. So for example, often those that work in tobacco know many people who have also worked in tobacco for years. There are often shared views, norms, and jargon among this community. But to those just coming into the work or to those just outside the work, progress on an initiative may sound completely foreign, or worse, seem positive but not hold the weight of the real number of mountains that had to move to make the change. Additionally, there are other audiences who have no idea of what mountains might exist, much less that you had to move those mountains to create a healthier environment for your community. Communities are often asked how their work affects the lives of the people who benefit from the program and how many people were affected by the change. Using success stories, you can clearly illustrate your progress, promote your work with external and internal audiences, foster new ideas, and make the case to sustain the activities for the long run. We've listed a few examples here, but audiences for your success story can include community leaders, they can include partners and partner organizations, funders, the media, other awardees and practitioners, current or future coalition members, or even your beneficiaries. As you complete your work in the field, there are several phases and steps along the development of your program or activities. Success stories can be helpful at each of these phases. Therefore, through working with communities to develop these success stories, we have identified three main types of stories. These are outcome success stories. These stories describe successful strategies that positively affect large numbers of people across a number of sites, such as a school district, county, city, or a state. They also include stories that focus on large percentages of a population that you're trying to reach. Capacity building stories detail how a community improved their resources or ability to complete initiatives or activities that might result in a system or environmental change. So the focus of the story might describe training initiatives or obtaining additional funding. Demonstration stories describe initiatives that involve fewer numbers of people, but could be scaled to positively impact larger groups. The story might describe a pilot activity in one or two locations that could be implemented across a community, a city, a county, or a state. And although there are many ways to tell a success story, by identifying the type of story, it can help gather key information. It's important to remember that some of the tools and tactics shared in today's webinar are open for use for anyone working in the field. For example, the Division of Community Health Success Story application that we'll talk about a little bit later. It's a tool that can be used by anyone no matter what kind of story that you're crafting. But how do these story types correlate to the different activities that you do? Well, we're going to explore that next. So let's first look at the different phases of the work, right? Now I want everyone to take off their science hats for a moment. What we'd like to do for the next couple of slides is to talk about programs in a really broad sense. The activities we use as examples may be completed in the phases that we have listed, but they can also occur at other times too. So for this illustration, please think big steps, big picture, right? Often, when a program starts out, someone says, hey, you know, this is an issue and it's going on in our community. It's not good for us. It's not good for our community. And so one or two people start talking to one another about this issue. And then they gather other like-minded people to discuss the issue. And before you know it, there's a coalition. And there are assessments to determine the scope of the issue. Everyone is seeking and getting funding from multiple sources. And even staff members are being trained on the proper ways to address this issue that's been identified. All of these types of activities happen in those early stages, sometimes before you even know that it'll develop into any kind of program yet. So once everyone is at the table, there's sufficient funding to start, and there's a proper plan in place, the team then starts to implement the program. And often this is done on a small scale at first. You know, maybe you try it out in one or two schools instead of an entire district, or one or two hospitals or workplaces. And as you do, you start to gather data about how successful the plan or program was in that limited environment. And then, once you see success in the limited environments, your team starts planning on making it bigger to affect larger populations. So, for example, you expand from those one or two schools to a whole school district, or from 2 workplaces to the largest employer in your area. So finally, as the program is working for large groups of people, it must be maintained. So additional funding is sought and obtained. Perhaps a new pilot program is started in a nearby community, and additional information is gathered and evaluated, and perhaps even another aspect to address the issue is implemented. Again, these phases that we're talking about in the presentation today are very broad spectrum and not included in every program that you implement. But as we were listing examples, I hope that you were able to think of at least one example of the work that you do that might be reflected in some or all of the phases that we've talked about. So just like the developmental phases, the different types of stories might be used at different phases in development. It's important to note that each type of story can happen at any phase in your work. You might write a capacity building story after you've already implemented your program, if maybe additional training was happening, those kinds of things, or a demonstration story at the end. But for today's presentation, we've simply broken it down into these large buckets to help clarify the types of stories with some concrete examples. So capacity building stories focus on the effort in the early phases, right? Increasing the community's capacity for doing the program, for example, funding, or increasing the capacity to do the work, for example, training. It can also include creating a plan on how to address a public health issue. Notice that I didn't use forming a coalition as an example. Here's the reasoning. Just forming a coalition doesn't show enough change. Sure, you were able to get everyone to the table to talk about the issue, but so what? I mean, what is going to change? And that can be the tricky thing about capacity building stories. They must show real change, even if the change is, now we have a plan with goals, deliverables, and a timeline, right? That's still change. Even when focusing a story on training for current staff to make system changes, there's a clear change in the work that they do. Information in the story should reflect how the training helped attendees be more efficient at their jobs. So as you reach to the middle phases of development, demonstration and outcome stories become more prominent. Now, these stories focus on pilot programs that show measurable change from before program implementation to after system or environmental changes. The major difference between demonstration and outcome stories are the number of individuals affected, right? So demonstration stories highlight programs that affect smaller numbers of people or smaller percentages of the people you're trying to reach. However, you may have an outcome story at this phase too, especially if you reach large numbers of people or large percentages of your focus population. As you expand the program and enter the later phases, outcome stories really discuss affecting a measurable system or environmental change that affects large groups of people or the majority of people who are affected by the health issue. Then as we move to the maintenance, so activities for the maintenance phase can be varied, right? Therefore, the type of story you write during that phase could be any of the above. If the focus of the story is obtaining additional funding to maintain the program, you might write a capacity building story. If the topic is starting to implement the same program, maybe among a slightly different demographic, the story may be a demonstration story to illustrate the specific nuances of working with that new demographic. Or if a current program is expanded to reach even larger audiences, it could be another outcome story. Overall, all of the story types, the one thing they all have in common is that they show measurable change. So as we are crafting these stories, we want to consider how we structure the story and the information included. The Division of Community Health Success Stories application is a tool that you can use to craft your success stories. So over the next few slides, we'll discuss how storytelling aligns with public health, the messaging framework maybe that you've seen before, that you will see in the future, and how you can leverage maybe the DCH Success Stories application to craft those strong stories. But first we want to start with the basics of storytelling, right? A beginning, a middle, and an end. So many stories that we heard growing up or that we may tell others start with once upon a time, right? As a culture, we all identify that phrase as the opening to a story. Then the story goes on to introduce characters, tell about their motivations, their hopes, fears, or wants, and what happens because of who they are. Then as the story draws to a close, we see that the hero of the story accomplishes their goal. That always signals that the end is coming, right? The good guy gets the reward and the bad guy gets caught. And then we hear, and they all lived happily ever after. And we know that the story is over. Well, public health has a story format too. We just know it as different words. When we describe the problem or the challenge, it's the beginning. The solution is the middle, and the results are the end. The challenge is the once upon a time in our community we are not happy and healthy. And then the story talks about the heroes who work to make the community better. And then in the close, the story says, well, because of the solution implemented, we are now this much closer to living happily ever after. And it's important to remember in every story there is change. The Little Red Riding Hood meets the wolf in the forest and in grandmother's house. Goldilocks doesn't just walk through the woods. The story is interesting because she finds the house of the three bears. We also see the same things in movies and entertainment, right? Even though some reality TV and even sitcoms follow the same structure for every episode, something changes for the people in that show that makes it interesting. Your least favorite guy gets immunity from getting kicked off the island. Or Rachel and Ross from Friends almost get together this time. Every good story shows change. Every single one. So what can that change look like in the capacity building story? Well, here we have an example. Let's say the community is starting to implement a program similar to Complete Streets, but it's still early. The community knows the specific environmental changes that need to be made and when the city or town might make them. However, actual construction hasn't started yet, so there's no way to see if people are utilizing those environmental changes. A success story will help get others, internally and externally, on board to support environmental changes and to use those new environments. The challenge was not knowing what was needed, or even if the community was walkable or bikeable. So the team implemented a solution. They assessed the community. The team completed a walkability and bikeability assessment. Based on that assessment, it was determined that the new sidewalks and bike lanes were needed. They made a plan to implement those environmental changes. A demonstration story will look a bit different since there will be people using the environmental or system change, right? And you will be tracking the effectiveness of that change even if it's on a smaller scale. So in the example listed here, The challenge notes that all of the students in the district may not have access to fresh produce. But so far, the team working on this initiative has only implemented access activities at one high school. That's all the capacity they have right now. So there are still results, even if they're not large in number. 800 students now have access to fresh produce. Because it's implemented in one school and not across the entire district, this is a demonstration story. Outcome stories affect large groups of people or large percentages of the audiences that you're trying to reach. So in this example, 900 families live in multi-unit housing. This implementation team worked with landlords and residents to require all residents to smoke in designated outside smoking areas only. If the average family is 4 people, that's about 3,600 residents who now live in smoke-free housing. And although the population of your city or town may be 300,000 people, this environmental change affects all those that live in multi-unit housing. So although 3,600 people may not be a lot of people when compared to the total population, it is all of the audience you're trying to reach with the indoor air quality program. So this should be highlighted in the story as well. If you're working with a smaller percentage of a total population or a smaller total population, include that information in your story. If the total population for the town is 100 people, but now all 100 people now have access to fresh produce, you have reached every person in town, and that's what makes it an outcome story. The displayed message framework can be another tool to help you craft strong success stories. You can also use something similar when conducting media outreach. So specifying the problem and illustrating the current landscape should all be part of the challenge section of your success story. Why is this a public health issue? Get the reader's attention with facts or a real example. You'll also want to illustrate the previous landscape. What were things like before you created the environmental or system change? Explain why the problem matters by personalizing or humanizing the issue. How does this affect daily life or the individuals affected? How does the public health issue affect values that we all hold, such as the ability to have happy and healthy lives? Then describe the solution or the steps that you took to address the public health issue. Include a sense of hope and make it achievable. Next, describe the results. What has changed so far based on the solution that you implemented? Finally, what should the audience do who are reading your success story? What should they do? This information can be included in your involvement is key section when using the DCH Success Stories application. We'll show you that a bit later. So when crafting that first draft, it's really important to focus on the challenge or problem, the solution, and results. Then add the specific next steps for the readers of your story. Okay, we're going to take a pause here for a moment. Before we move on to the different tips and tricks you can use to gather information and write your story, we're going to take a quick poll. And you know, based on responses to the poll and what have you, we know that you might have some questions, and we'll give an opportunity at the end of the presentation to ask some of those questions. But we want to ask, do you have a more clear idea of the types of stories to write about in your programs or activities? So please choose A for yes or B for no. We'll give everybody a moment to really make their selection. And it looks like just about everybody has a more clear idea of the different types of success stories and how they can identify where they are and how they can use those success stories. So we hope that the example stories we've got included in the download as well that we'd like to share with you a bit later can help with gathering some information and provide even more clear examples. So next we're going to talk a little bit about some of the tips and tricks that you can use when you're drafting your success story. So we're going to break things down a little bit, and hopefully it makes things easier to write. And we're going to provide you with many methods to get everything on paper, but we realize that it can be absolutely a bit daunting to see all of these ideas at once. I mean, it makes a writer wonder, how am I supposed to be able to do all of that? So first, we want to share the biggest secrets to success story writing, and there are two. And if you ever get stuck, always go back to these two secrets. They are by far the easiest tip and trick that we can give you. Here they are. Secret number one. A first draft is your best friend. Often writers become overwhelmed with all of the information and details to include in a story, or they simply do not know where to start. When this happens to me, even a chart seems daunting. So I'll start with 3 pieces of paper. At the top of the first, I write challenge or problem. On the second, I write solution. And on the third, results. Then I think about everything I know about my activity or initiative. I jot down each fact or thought on one of those 3 pieces of paper. And if it relates to a future direction for the work, I might mark a star next to it. Then I'll review everything that I wrote down, and did I put it in the right section? Okay, so then I look at what's the main idea I want the reader to know for each section. Now it's only a matter of deciding what to include in my story and what order the information should appear. Ernest Hemingway said it best. The only kind of writing is rewriting. So often, to create strong success stories, you spend more time editing the stories than creating that first draft. And once it's all there, it's easy to move around. I would also encourage you to complete the exercise and save the information for all of your stories related to a specific initiative. It can be helpful to review as you write stories for different stakeholders type, which pieces to bring out and really highlight. Secret number 2 is have fun with creating your success story. If you enjoy the story, it'll come through in the work. Your readers have a much greater chance of enjoying the story as well. Just remember, it doesn't matter where you start. Getting something on paper, even a list or sentence fragments, is the important part. So after you list out all the details about the initiative or activity, you'll want to review them and pick out the most important. First, you should start with the most important facts you want the reader to know or understand after reading your story. What is the main idea or message? What is the headline? Then pick out the main idea for each section. Each section main idea should relate back to and support the main idea or headline of the story. So for the challenge section, it might be the clearest statistic about the public health issue your initiative addresses. Or for the results section, it might be the largest change implemented by your program. Then, for each section, determine the strongest supporting details for that main idea or message. If you don't have very many or feel more comfortable doing so, rank the details listed from most important to least important. And once you've identified all the details and main ideas, you'll use the inverted pyramid to organize the information. So some of you may actually be familiar with this from past experiences or classes. In this style, you state the most important information first, and we call this the lead. So remember, it's called the lead because it leads the paragraph. It always goes first, not buried somewhere later in the paragraph. Using the inverted pyramid writing style is a key tool in creating strong success stories that accurately communicate your message. Always start with the lead, and then use details to support that lead. Then the least important information goes at the end. This allows a reader to quickly skim your story and still have a clear picture of your work. So when structuring a story, it sometimes helps to create a chart with the information to include, right? That's what we're doing really with 3 pieces of paper. And we've started a simple chart here. It has a challenge, a problem, solution, and results. And by grouping the known information about the initiative, we can start to more clearly see the changes made. So the information won't be in the right order, but we can start organizing it. So we used a real-life program objective to build the sample chart here. Of course, all the names and some facts have been changed to protect the innocent, but the objective was this. By September 2016, increase the number of smoke-free multi-unit housing developments in our town from 2 to 20, removing the danger of secondhand smoke for approximately 4,000 people. So we start to organize the information. It's important to include details and data. Often we do this when we tell stories, right? So like Goldilocks has gold hair. 3 bears live in the house in the woods, a papa bear, a mama bear, and baby bear. These are all details. And they add additional data to make the story stronger. When telling a public health story, they really illustrate the change. We've highlighted the data in green, or some of the data in green, to make it easy to identify. We've helped clarify numbers by using analogies, right? So for example, nearly 9 out of 10 makes the information more clear. The same is true when we read 3 out of 4 families will be safe in the results section. Even though the story only focuses on the number of lives touched, we know there is a change for these families. And we have information about, if we have information about the number of people who have quit tobacco, this information would definitely be included in the story as well. So including data and details is important to telling the best story. Can you imagine hearing the story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears if you didn't know that there were 3 bears, 3 bowls of porridge, 3 chairs, or 3 beds? It totally ruins the story. The same can be true for data in your success story. So as you start to select the details from your notes to include in the story, go ahead and place a priority on those that show the greatest change. It can mean the difference in a story that seems to affect a few people or one that affects thousands. Your stakeholders are going to be the most interested in the stories that show the highest return on investment and the most environmental or systems changes. So once you have all of your facts and notes lined up by section and order of importance, use this checklist to ensure that you have the right information in the right order. So does the order clearly describe the change, right? You're going from pre-program or activity versus post-program or activity. What changed? Is there tangible data to clearly illustrate the changes? This can include observation surveys before and after the initiative, data illustrating how many people were affected, any changes in behavioral health for the target audiences, and any changes in practices. For example, how did healthcare practitioners address smoking interventions before? How have they changed the systems and how do they do it now? Other examples of systems changes might be addressing blood pressure maintenance or obesity among patients. Finally, are you including more information than just people saying how great the program or activity is? Meaning, is each section more than just a series of quotes from those who have benefited from your program or activity? Although highly impactful, this type of endorsement or testimony is like hot sauce. Great for adding an extra kick to the story, but shouldn't be the only flavor present. When working with communities on stories, there are a few things that we see more often than others, and these things will often trip up a reader, right? Keeping them from obtaining valuable information about the initiative. You can safely avoid these pitfalls by simply remembering your audience for your success story. They may not know you, about your community, or what you do. For example, not everyone who reads or views or listens to your story is familiar with complete streets. They don't know what that means, much less how hard it might be to implement. So be careful of jargon. It trips us all. Also be careful of locally known information. Okay, so if I said we added a bike lane to Main Street, St. Charles, Missouri, to most everyone on the webinar, it means we added a bike lane. Adding additional information tells outsiders the complete story. So for example, I say, the 2-mile bike lane added to the cobblestone downtown area of St. Charles, Missouri now connects the Lindenwood University 5-mile bike trail to the 237-mile Katy Trail. The Katy Trail is now safely accessible to more than 8,000 students, faculty, and staff. This is a much more complete picture. So always double check your story against the 5 W's. Who was involved? Who was affected? What changed? What did you do? When did it happen? Where did it happen? And why was the change needed? The how is optional, depending on how it affects the information above. So often when completing like case studies or journal articles or reports, the more information about how is needed then. Like when crafting shorter success stories, the details of the how can actually bog down the reader in jargon or a public health implementation education, and should only be included to clarify details if needed. Finally, once we have all the facts on paper, it's important to remember that how you say something can be as important as what you say. The stories that most move us are those that we connect with. And these stories are the ones that draw on common values, our ability to live happy, healthy lives, to love, and to provide for those that we love. The movie The Pursuit of Happiness is a great example of a story that resonates with many audiences because it draws on a common value, the ability to provide for your family or child. An example in your work might include families having access to and being able to afford fresh produce. This concept can resonate to that same common value, right? Providing for your family. So using vivid imagery can also help you craft a strong story that resonates with readers. For example, rather than saying Medicare recipients, try our parents and grandparents in nursing homes. Or rather than using terms like individuals of low socioeconomic status, consider individuals who might struggle to put food on the table or buy school supplies. Remember, human behavior is motivated by emotion. The more a reader emotionally connects to a cause, the more likely they are to do what they can to support that cause or concept. As humans, we emotionally connect to others by seeing ourselves in their situation, by drawing on common values, and using clear imagery. You can add emotion to your story that facilitates the reader's connection to the beneficiaries. To help illustrate the different types of data and the way you might order the information in a success story, we've included 3 example stories in your packet today. And each will have a copy that includes call-outs using the comments feature. So make sure that you enable that to highlight specific elements that help strengthen the story. Feel free to use these stories as examples when crafting your own story. Also, the DCH Success Stories library found on the DCH Success Stories application contains outcome stories that might help as well. The DCH Success Stories application is an online tool that you can use to craft these strong success stories. And we wanted to take a moment and share this tool with you. Now, it makes it easier to develop the stories, and you can share them with your partners, your community members, and others. So here is the application's homepage. The video, that's the large green screen in the middle of the page, features several community members sharing their experience with the site and how they have used the success stories that they've developed. And then just below the video, new users can create an account. Creating an account is required to develop stories in the application and ensures that the stories you are currently drafting are only accessible by you until you're ready to share them. So if one were to scroll a little bit further down, we would see additional features of the site that the site offers, such as links to the Division of Community Health Success Stories library that we just mentioned, and the writer's resource page. To the right, those who have created an account can quickly and easily sign in. The Division of Community Health Success Story application can be found on the Division of Community Health website, cdc.gov/communityhealth, and on the DCH website resources page. So after logging in, you'll find yourself at your dashboard, and here you'll see a list of all the stories that you have created in the application. You can click a story's title to edit that story, or click the Create a New Story, the cranberry button, to start a new story. Often, you share the same story with many of the stakeholders or audiences in your community. So based on an audience's preference or personality, you might want to edit specific parts of your success story. Using the Success Stories application, you can do just that, instead of having to craft a whole other story, and we'll show you how. After you click the Create a New Story button, you'll need to identify the funding vehicle used to support the initiative you'll be writing about. And there's an other box if you want to fill that in. And once you check the corresponding box for that funding vehicle, or if you choose to edit an existing story, you'll find yourself at a page that looks similar to this. So using the Jump To menu at the top of each page allows you to quickly navigate through your story, decide which section to start with, and allows you access to any of the sections that might need additional editing. For the purposes of this presentation, so we've actually expanded the view so that you can see all of the sections of a success story. And by choosing a specific section and pressing the Go button, you can jump to that section of the currently crafted story. So this way you can quickly jump to the sections that you want to change, make the changes, and then download a revised document. So as we discussed before, each section should use the inverted pyramid writing style. List your most important information in the section first, and then list your supporting details. It might be helpful to go to the challenge selection first, but followed by the solution and then maybe the results section. To the left, there's a visual representation of your success story. And although it's not dynamic in showing the exact text of your story, as you fill in the different sections, that graphic will change. So this provides a visual representation of the sections completed and what has yet to be filled in. And then below the graphic, you see a preview PDF and preview doc and submit to CDC buttons. Now, by choosing the preview PDF or the preview doc buttons, you can instantly download the PDF or a dynamic Word document. You might have also noticed that submit to CDC button below the preview buttons, and this submits the story to CDC for possible inclusion to the Division of Community Health Success Stories library found on another page on this site. Definitely talk this over with your funding organization and make sure to include them in any information that you have there. But you can use those preview PDF and preview document buttons to really share your success story with maybe your funding organization, but make sure you have those conversations with them. So to the right, you'll actually, in the middle of the page, you will find the title of the specific section in which you're currently working, and the character limit information below this title helps ensure the section fits in the final professionally designed template. As you craft your text, you'll use the large box in the center of the page. Or if you're more comfortable, you can craft your text in another document, such as like a Microsoft Word document, and then paste the text here. Below, you will find the back and next buttons. These navigate us through the sections of the story in a linear fashion, and the spell check feature, when clicked, checks for spelling errors. The font size allows you to increase or decrease the text in your story by one font size, and helping to ensure that the text fits optimally in the template. So to the right, you will see several tips and examples of this section. The top box contains writing tips. Below this, you will find a stronger and a weaker example of the specific success story section. And if you roll over any of the cranberry text in that section, you will see the reason why this highlighted text might need improvement or helps craft a strong success story. So here we've listed the fields of a success story. This includes the challenge, solution, and results we discussed previously in the presentation. But it also expands to include a short summary, a way to speak directly to the user or to the reader using the Your Involvement is Key section, and next steps for the program or activities. The quote calls out that extra bit of hot sauce so everyone can clearly see it, and the title lets everyone know who you are and what the story is about. The DCH Success Stories application also offers 6 different templates for your success story. Here, you will select the template for your story. The templates are listed down the right of the screen and include a brief description of the type of stakeholder or audience that this template might appeal to. This means that after crafting your story, you can access that story again and again, only changing the template or image that appears. And this creates a different look and feel to the story appropriate for a different stakeholder type. Additionally, the site offers nearly 300 images that can be used free of charge in the success story. Simply choose any of the photos in the photo library and it will drop into your success story. Now you can use local photos on a local level by downloading the Preview Doc Microsoft Word document. Using Microsoft Word tools, you can delete the photo in the story and paste the local photo in. The story with the local photo can be shared at the local level. Unfortunately, local photos cannot be added to the Success Stories application or be submitted with a success story. Planning your story early can really help craft a strong success story. So post your challenge, solution, and result notes on a bulletin board. It helps. And before you start the initiative or strategy, it may be helpful to gather the pre-data. For example, if the activity included environmental changes such as creating additional sidewalks or bicycle paths, how many miles existed before? How many miles of bike path or sidewalks are there now? And Did you maybe connect two major paths? Or rather, by building a mile of sidewalk or walking path, were you able to connect two paths and now have 10 miles of sidewalks? Another example would be in school lunch changes, right? What did the district serve before? Were there healthy options available? What are the healthy options available now? How many are served at lunches on a regular basis? So collaborate across your program, activities, or initiatives. Often the same information that you're gathering for evaluation can be used in your success stories. If you have any questions or need further assistance navigating the Division of Community Health Success Stories application, please contact us at the email address listed here, dchssassistance@cdc.gov, or you can use the Contact Us link found in the bottom navigation on the site. And as always, happy storytelling.
Thank you, Melissa. Great presentation. We are now going to open things up for questions from any of the participants in today's webinar. If you do have a question, we'd like to ask you to go ahead and type your question into the question box, and we will address all questions in the order that they are received. So if you do have a question, please go ahead and type that into the box. And Melissa, while we wait for people to gather thoughts and put in any questions they might have, thank you for providing both an overview of the pieces required to build a success story and also a demo of the new tool that's available for actually completing a success story, which I think will be very helpful for a lot of people on today's call. Okay, attendees, are there any questions from the audience? Melissa, one thing I did want to note, you did outline the three different types of success stories, which are the outcome story, capacity building story, and the demonstration story. I think for a lot of the subrecipients on this particular project, some of the initial concerns that we had or questions that we were starting to get as far as discussion was about the types of things that people might actually be formulating their stories on, given that many of them are still immersed in the work or in early stages of the work. I think outlining the possibility of doing a demonstration story or the capacity building story might work very well for some, whereas an outcome story for a lot of people may come a little bit later in the process.
Right, exactly. And that's one of the things that we wanted to be sure that was a little, that was clear. Just because, you know, success stories are really helpful along the entire continuum of the work that you do. It's not just necessarily when everything's done and everything's off and running smoothly. Success stories can be really helpful to get those things done and to get things off and running smoothly. It just depends on the focus and the types of information that you highlight in your success story. So when you're at those beginning phases where you're just getting started, those capacity building stories can be really helpful. We see them a lot. We use examples like trainings. You're trying to get everybody on board and get everybody up to speed with the work that you're doing there. You know, it's the real change that happens between what you did before and what you do now. And there's lots of steps in that. So we want folks to know that, you know, it's those little steps that you include in the story that makes it just as strong.
Okay. Looks like we do have a question from one of the participants. The question is, can we use local media stories that are about the programs we are working on?
So like stories, I'm just going to ask for a little bit of clarification. So like stories that the media develops, that can you include those in your success stories? And the truth is, yeah, I mean, if you have impact in the media, crafting a strong success story about maybe media or earned media that you didn't have before, I mean, that could very much be a capacity building story. And you can craft and say, you know, we were able to have the media increase awareness of this because of the work that we did here, and this is how we earned that kind of idea. I'm not quite sure that that answers the question, but maybe just a little bit of clarification on the question. It can give you a better answer.
Okay, actually, I'm going to unmute the line to see if perhaps the person asking the question wanted to provide some additional detail.
Sure.
Okay, Quincy Christian, your line is unmuted. Quincy, are you there? Okay, it looks like we're not getting audio. Okay. Melissa, with regard to audience, let's talk about that a little bit. One of the things that you noted in terms of building a success story is calling to people's attention the need to clearly define who the audience is when you're building the story. In one case, maybe the audience might be media, and in another case, it might be a different type of stakeholder. What are some ways that people might actually change the content of the success story or tailor it depending on audience?
There's a lot of different ways, in fact. I think probably the strongest example that we included in the presentation of that is maybe the difference in a local audience versus a national audience. When we work on success stories, we really are trying to reach that national audience. So a lot of nuances about a local area, to folks outside that area, they don't know, especially whenever you're doing environmental changes. They don't realize the impact that you're actually having. It can also mean the difference, like if you're talking to internal audiences, that you're working with maybe another division at your health department or another department, talking to them and framing things for them would be a little bit different than maybe talking to another stakeholder in your community. Talking to the PTA folks, the Parent-Teacher Association folks would be a little bit different. An example that I might just kind of off the top of my head, if you're talking to maybe another department internally in your health department about implementing a program, you'd want to frame it in the work that they might already do and how this fits in with the work that they might already do. So, that whole framework of, we're a team and you guys are doing this and we're doing this, and we can really make strong impacts together. So the information that you would include in that success story would be a little bit different than the information that you might include if you're saying, partnering with another community-based group or a private group. Okay. So the strongest illustration, like I said, is that national audience, but if you're thinking about where they're coming from, then that tells you what details to highlight.
Okay, thank you. Okay, are there any other questions that we haven't touched on or things that anyone on the line would like to ask to Melissa in terms of crafting your success story? Do most of the people on the line feel like they kind of have a few ideas for what they might develop for a success story? Maybe a show of hands. Okay, we see a couple of hands going up there. Okay. If anyone thinks of questions they have later, we will make Melissa Byers' information available so that you could send some questions. We will have a part 2 scheduled for success story development, which will be structured as a Ask the Expert office hours session. That is scheduled for August 5. So it will provide another opportunity for people to ask any questions as you start development of your success stories for this particular project. We will be sharing a copy of today's presentation with you following today's webinar, as well as a link to the archived recording of the webinar. So seeing no questions, we're nearing the top of the hour. We will go ahead and close for today. And Melissa, thank you for a wonderful presentation, great overview of what looks like a very useful tool for subrecipients, and also great coverage of today's topic on success story development. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciated it and enjoyed the presentation.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. That will conclude today's presentation.